Hello guys, my name is Faith Roy and I am here today to present the abridged biography of Emily Dickinson. As Professor Fowles may have mentioned, I took some of these photos myself at the Emily Dickinson Museum, but hopefully I do more than just advertise that place to you. And I'm going to start this presentation with something a bit unorthodox, but something I consider the ground zero of Emily's life. See, before Emily was born, the Dickinsons were already prominent members of Amherst society and had lived there for generations. Her grandfather, Samuel Fowler Dickinson, was a lawyer and the co-founder of both Amherst Academy and Amherst College. He built the homestead in 1813, which was the first brick house in Amherst, and it eventually became the home of, well, Edward Dickinson. He was a lawyer like his father and was very well educated, but he was also a politician. He was a Whig candidate elected to the Massachusetts State Legislature, the Massachusetts State Senate, and even Congress at the end of his political career. He married Emily Norcross, another intellectual, which would lead to him fathering Emily Elizabeth Dickinson, who was born on December 10th, 1830. There was also her older brother, William Austin, and her younger sister, Lavinia Norcross. The three of them were very close with each other, even if they didn't necessarily get along all the time, like most siblings do. But on a sort of somber note, they'd also be the last Dickinsons to live in the homestead. Given their background, their parents wanted their kids to be educated like they were, so the three of them would all end up attending Amherst Academy together. When she was 16, Emily then attended Mount Holyoke Women's Seminar back when it was just a seminar. She loved science like her mother did, was very well educated for a time, and was considered to be the family thinker by her sister Lavinia. Unfortunately for Emily, Mount Holyoke was a religious school under Mary Lyons' rule. She was deemed by her professors to have no hope of redemption in Christ, which she was perfectly fine with. Some people believe that this was the reason why she only went there for a year, while others think her father disliked the curriculum. Either way, it would end up being the last institution she would attend. Now that she was out of school, Emily was expected to become a full-fledged member of society, which included housework and seeing people every day. The homestead had a lot of visitors between the Whig Party, other distinguished guests, and college students, and she wanted to talk to none of them. She was also expected to become a Christian and a wife, neither which she wanted to be. Emily hated most chores, but did like baking bread and tending to her garden, which she had on the property thanks to her love of botany. She had a dog named Carlo, who she called her shaggy ally, and spent a lot of time reading Western literature, which was definitely not hard to find in the house of a studious family. But what stands out during this time is that she was starting to really like writing letters and poems. Which I think is a good segue into my thesis, which is that Emily Dickinson never intended nor wanted to be considered an icon. She just wanted to have the freedom to be herself in a world that expected her to be somebody. In terms of my evidence, I can point to her seclusion and other things down the line, but I feel that one particular poem solidifies this for me. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. I feel this is a personal piece that speaks for itself and also adds a bit of irony to what we're doing right now. In terms of her writing tactics, she loved to create startling imagery with metaphors and abstract nouns. She also liked using double meanings but rarely incorporated rhymes. Emily also used dashes instead of commas in her works and averted the usage of common forms/niceties. Dickinson wrote many definition poems, as well as about the aspects of life and death. She primarily used a simple women's writing desk to write her poems, but if she had an idea and a means of writing it down, she would not hesitate to. Emily preferred writing letters because they were, quote, uninterrupted and direct, and she could test different versions of her poems. She was very self-critical, though, and only allowed one other person to directly edit her work. Susan Gilbert, who was pressured into marrying Austin Dickinson, became Emily's sister-in-law and closest correspondent for her works. It's debated as to whether or not they were lovers. A telling sign was that Emily pressed violets into her letters a la Sappho, which she was likely aware of due to her being a botanist and a poet. Susan became both an editor and a muse for her either way. Emily's self-criticism is said to be why she didn't publish most of her work during her lifetime. She did end up befriending Samuel Bowles of the Springfield Republican, an ongoing newspaper that published some of her works. Most of the publishing that did happen during her lifetime, though, was through her friends and family without her knowledge or consent, though that didn't stop her from writing to them. Unfortunately for her friends, though, she started seeing them less and less despite valuing them as part of her personal estate. She also ended up growing apart from Susan around this time, though nobody knows why this is the case. Emily also ended up helping take care of her paralyzed mother during the last several years of her life, and it was during this time that she began to write less and less. In her final years, she briefly dated Judge Otis Phillips Lord and even considered marriage, but never went through with it. There were a lot of deaths in her family at that time, including her father's, mother's, and little nephew Gibbs. Gibbs in particular made her physically ill and led to her dying from health complications on May 15th, 1886. Emily begged her sister Lavinia to burn her poems after she died, which she found stowed away in neatly sewn packets in Emily's room. Lavinia was very reluctant to do it herself, though, and asked Susan to do it for her. But Lavinia reportedly had a, quote, Joan of Arc moment, and realized that the poems were too important to burn, and ultimately refused her sister's dying request. She wanted to publish them, but Emily's works were hard to transcribe. The poems were never titled and rarely dated, which often leads to them getting sorted by theme instead. Her aforementioned writing tactics were considered uncouth for her time, plus you had to factor in the multiple versions of poems that she had mailed out to friends and family as well, if copies of them still existed. Lavinia relented, and with the help of Thomas Higginson and Mabel Todd, published Emily's first poetry book 4 years later. It and later publishings had to be edited so that audiences would understand her poems, but the originals were preserved about a century later. It's because of their efforts that Emily became one of the most acclaimed poets of the 19th century and a recluse no more. And I would like to finish this presentation with a poem. I had no time to hate, because the grave would hinder me, and life was not so, ample I could finish enmity. Nor had I time to love, but since some industry must be, the little toil of love, I thought, be large enough for me. Thank you for watching.